Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for listening at this hour of the afternoon where everybody would like to take a snooze. I think that this question of anamnetic justice we heard about is actually one central to politics also. But I will now tune in again into the debate we had this morning. And I think that it's important to say that, or we saw already, that the whole discourse has a political side, and that also the church discourse has a political side to it. I was a bit surprised, I say it openly, about the title, One Christian Understanding of Human Dignity. And my title is a bit a counter title, saying different dignities, how a misunderstanding co-shapes ecclesial politics. Because I think that many of these dignity courses at the moment are important at two levels, at an intellectual level, as we have seen in the morning, and there the differentiations also of Professor Wood were important, and of course a political level to it. In my statement, I want to argue that such a difference in understanding is, as I just said, based on a misunderstanding that can, however, be easily dispelled from an ethical as well as a theological point of view. However, it might be more difficult to dispel it from a political point of view because it has become in many ways an identity marker, and the ecclesial self-understanding is here closely tied up with the political self-understanding. In other words, the different understandings of dignity constitute a part of different political worldviews and different ecclesial worldviews, less different theological worldviews. They are also closely linked up with a particular understanding of modernity. In other words, human rights and human dignity here stand for different understandings of modernity as such. There is a beautiful introduction to a lecture by Bulgakov from 1936 where he compares modernity to a sphinx. And a sphinx, as you know, has a human front side and an animal's back side. So modernity has a humanist side to it, but it has also a brutal side to it, and we could agree to that. And the second thing about the Sphinx is that anybody who goes by, it stands in front of Theban, and anybody who goes by has to answer its questions. And if he doesn't, he is being eaten up. So we may very well say, and this is what Bulgakov also does, that anybody who doesn't answer to the questions of modernity, any church which doesn't answer to the questions of modernity, will be secularized. And here I think much more that this lack of answers, we had this debate in the morning, is much more a reason for secularism than are the evil sides of modernity only. Now I would clearly say, perhaps also taking up this morning's discussion, that human rights belong to the human side of the Sphinx, and this practically unambiguously. We can very much discuss that, but I think the brutal sides of the Sphinx, the backside, are other phenomena which are highly ambivalent. I will present my argument in 3 points. First, Euromaidan, since we are on the place. Secondly, the struggle for dignity between morals and human rights, also embedding the discourse, and then short why the churches are so divided on the issue. I don't have much to say here on the revolution of dignity, but what is interesting, however, and I think it also came out already in this morning's discussion, is that there was no division on the question of dignity. Mr. Marinovich said that very clearly. We were completely unified on this issue. And I think this is very important. However, this revolution of dignity has a particular contexts which is linked to other contexts. And I think the first context, after all, which made this common approach possible was the legal context. The word dignity is a main word in legal documents after World War II and the experience of Nazism and Stalinism. In this context, and I want to cite the words here to bring them to your memory, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights starts with the following words. Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights, so here dignity and rights are closely linked, of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world, whereas disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind and the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom in speech and belief and freedom from fear and want, has been proclaimed as the highest aspirations of the common people. Whereas it is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. So here we have the dignity and the human rights certainly not juxtaposed against each other, but they have the common aim, the rule of law. Here, in the same way, the German Constitution states in Article 1 and so on. I do not think that there are much questions that it was this legal definition that the revolution of dignity also had in mind. One wanted rule of law, one wanted good governance and similar political norms. The people on Maidan protested for freedom and social rights and the change of the political order that was to be in accordance with international law and the legal provisions of the European Union. That means that in the present context, dignity has a specific meaning, and I say that also having in mind that very often, as I observe in theological and philosophical discourses, one forgets that there is a whole edifice of human rights on which our orders are based and which are discussed in detail. I'm at present also special rapporteur for the OSCE. This is all discussed in great deal and forms the basis of the legal community of nations and the international communities. On the other hand, there is, of course, a specific local color to it. I always use in my lections a picture the American Jewish philosopher Michael Walzer gives, where he says, if I see people standing on, I think it was Tiananmen Square, with signs saying justice and freedom, I know in principle what they mean, but of course what the concrete demands they make in their specific local context are, I cannot say if I'm not in this context. I think this is a very good picture also for Maidan, and I'm hoping here even to learn more about this concrete local context, because in this way we are bystanders. Let me now come to my second point, the struggle for human dignity between morals, human rights, and politics. Hannah Arendt showed in a brilliant essay that was published posthum 2 years ago, The Freedom to be Free, the success and consequences of a revolution. She compared the American and the French revolutions in the 19th century, depend on factors of historical and social context, as well as the morals of the people in a particular time. Arendt comes, of course, from a philosophical tradition that is stronger Aristotelian, and she shows that the masses, why was the success of the French and the American Revolution so different? Why did the French Revolution end with violence? And she says because the social context was a different one, also the possibilities of the people, the poverty of the people, etc. So moral attitudes and practices play a role and can be a central precondition for forming an effective government afterwards. This has been a theme in political philosophy since its beginnings. I just remind here of politeia, where the form of government the people has is completely dependent on the morals of the inhabitants of this country, and when these morals change, also the government changes. And Aristotle follows him on this. It is the good citizen which is the foundation of the good and just polis, and this line of thought continues and is also very important for Catholic social teaching. What does that have to do with our notion of dignity? The legal perspective I shortly outlined, and that of the international order, is based on a universalist notion of dignity as an inherent quality of each and every human being. That is the legal side of it, so to speak. This dignity can be violated by arbitrariness and oppression of the state, which means first and foremost that there have to be laws, constitution and others based on human rights. There is, of course, also another notion of dignity, which may be called the moral notion. There is a third notion, actually, which I don't want to mention now, which is more to what Professor Wood said this morning on social roles. For instance, to be a dignitary, is to have a certain social role. But here I want to stay with the two notions, legal and moral. However, one cannot separate the legal from the moral order, but they are complementary to each other. There has been a strong Enlightenment tradition, particularly in the legacy of Kant, that makes this strong separation between legality and morality. Kant once formulates, I always cite that in his On Eternal Peace, that also a nation of devils can make a good state. I very much doubt this. And I always then add, I would not like to live in this state. So this shows very clearly that the moral side has to go hand in hand with the legal side. Also, the two can be differentiated from each other. This means that also changes in behavior, and here the churches can make a great contribution, are important for the quality of a state. And it would be very sad to think, I always say, that all the preaching Christianity has done over the last 1,500 years, let's say on the Good Samaritan, or on the problematic side of wealth, etc., would have had no influence on the morals of the people. I think that would be pure cynicism to say that. So, in many ways, we live in a political situation where there is a certain Christian education which can be universalized, that I also want to say, but which is the other side of the medal so that a good state can function. If people don't obey laws, if there is the rate of corruption is too high, etc., you cannot make a good state even if you have good laws. So it has become clear that these two things go hand in hand. So why the churches are divided on the issue? I actually said it already in the beginning. I think it's a bit of a, if one can call that, fake problem. At the present, it has already been said, some Orthodox Church documents, particularly of the Russian Orthodox Church, stress the moral dimension of dignity, juxtaposing it with the human rights dimension, whereby there also the Russian Orthodox Church underwent a certain development in the document of 2000. It is still much closer. In the document of 2008, it's already much more critical vis-à-vis human rights. So there is also a development which must be stressed. On the other hand, there are churches which stress more the legal dimension, and as we have seen also this morning, I want to draw your attention to also the rights discourse in the United States and in Europe is different. So there are, as I said, these differences in local stress, in local situations. However, one must not make out of that a fundamental differentiation. The other side, which also has been said this morning, is that in the present political situation, we have new divisions between right and left, which also are mirrored in the churches. Left, I would here say, the social discourse, and right, I would say, the sexual ethics discourse. In many ways, they come together, but the strong stress on sexual ethics is a fairly new development also in the Catholic Church. And the last 2 or 3 decades, or what is new is always a bit relative, but anyway, you don't have it at Vatican II, for instance. And around these discourses, new ideological groups are formating. And this also influences strongly the Christian debate. What is in many countries now, and I see this with more and more problematic, Christian values are being in a way hijacked. The Russian Federation in 1999, together with Pakistan and some other countries, Muslim countries, promoted in the UN traditional values, which are in our context then called Christian values. And that is exactly these sexual questions on abortion, on homosexuality, etc. So these Christian values these are supposed to be the Christian values. And I always stand up and say, sorry, if you read the gospel, nothing is being said about these questions. And they existed also in the time of Jesus. I'm sorry. So we have a lot of talk on nonviolence. We have a lot of talk on social issues of the poor. But we don't have any talk on homosexuality, which was a practice in the Greek surroundings. So Jesus may have had his reasons. I'm a bit, yeah. So but I consider this discourse on so-called Christian values fairly dangerous. It's now taken up not only by the Russian Federation, it's also taken up by Hungary, and it is taken up by right-wing groups in the United States. So we have really a formation there, and it hurts me really that this is called Christian. And I feel with some Muslims who also have problems if things are called Muslim, which they don't consider to be in any way Muslim. Okay, to come back to the concept of dignity, slowly coming to a conclusion, in both forms the basis of Catholic social teaching, which combines the legal and the moral side. It is always understood in both its dimensions, and I think that could be also the case for Christian teaching. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century once says there are 3 forms of dignity. One form of dignity is according to creation, creatio. A second form of dignity is according to recreation. And a third form of dignity is the one that will be fully realized only when we are in a heaven, that is, in the eschaton. These 3 notions of dignity, in a way, present our discussion. The according to creation would be the legal dimension, which belongs to each and every human being. The one according to recreatio is the moral dimension, where human beings, in cooperation with grace, have to develop their personality according to moral rules, virtues, and norms. And the third one is the full dignity, which we will only in the end be given, as St. Ignatius in the 2nd century says in one of his letters, when he's going to martyrdom in Rome, he writes, "Now I'm here, but only then will I be a few human being. That means when I'm with God." then my humanity, my dignity will be fully realized. So that would be the proper theological notion, and that's why I think that the present debate on dignity, as it is led between churches, constitutes more a topic of ecclesial politics, but not one of faith and theology. Thank you.